Hi, and welcome to basically the end of week 5 and the beginning of week 6. As you guys are probably aware, you are going to be doing your midterm. It opened up on the 8th, and it will be open through this week and into the 15th um, of, of the coming week. It is proctored, so please make sure that you've set up your proctored information through ProctorU. You will be able to, of course, use notes, the book, and any kind of paper copy. You cannot use anything, of course, that's internet accessible. I'm sorry, it's actually not the 15th. It's actually the 16th at midnight. So you do have some time. I would have you rather take it sooner rather than later. That'd probably be a good idea. This week, week 6, you do not have any readings because you are going to be just working on the midterm. That also means that there's no discussion posting. However, if you go into the discussion board, you will see that there is a week 6 area. And the week 6 area has a little link where you can look at a study guide, and the study guide should help you in reference to preparing for your midterm. You can also bring this study guide with you in hard copy paper form um, to take with you as you take your exam. And I would highly recommend doing that because I think it's something that would prepare you for this midterm experience. Now, as far as last week's postings, I was very pleased to see that for the most part, you guys were very enthusiastic about the readings. Still, the poetry is not your favorite, but that you have kind of sensed a fair amount of involvement when it came to the short fiction. In fact, Kaylin mentioned that the story by Sherwood Anderson, Hands, really was something that kind of gave him a visceral experience of the text, especially because of the subject matter and the time period that Anderson was writing this. Um, Rico, and of course, his posting and his responses also explored the notion of kind of the reasoning behind these writers. The idea of broadening their horizon or thinking about contemporary situations during the writing period was also something important. And I thought Rico's point of modernism seeking to transform the perception of readers by engaging them in the now was really something prescient. In fact, Rico, Gertrude Stein, who was one of the, I guess you'd say, main supporters or main kind of figures in modernism, her whole thing was make it new. That's what the modernists were trying to do, and I like that you captured that in your definition. Um, Nathan, you had a great response back to Theron. I really think that you did a good job of exploring this kind of ethos or kind of ideology that the writers were pulling in. Excuse me. Ahmed, I like that you mentioned that they were a little down to earth and the notion of relation. Modernism really is something that we're very comfortable with. Many people do argue that we're still in that period, so I'm glad that you kind of see that and that you talked about kind of this notion of kind of being realistic to the point of being blunt, and that is a great observation. Kawana, I really agree with your observation about kind of the short stories that you were introduced and you engaged. I also thought I appreciate you mentioning the poetry too, because the poetry is just as important as the short fiction, but it can sometimes be a little harder to kind of get into. Um, Now, I do also agree that as Theron did in a very involved and engaged posting, thank you so much for your time and effort in doing this. Your reading of Wallace Stevens is fantastic. It really does pull in this notion of divinity and kind of the juxtaposition between faith and doubt that was occurring during the modern period. Of course, we have as Briona mentioned, that this is, the kind of a tension with both traditional beliefs and trying to think about other ideas beyond just the accepted ones. And I appreciate Brianna for mentioning that. Randall, I also like that you mentioned the style of writing, that it wasn't just the what subject matter that they were focusing on making new, but also the writing, the actual style, the sentence structure, the word choices, and that, of course, is a key point to pull out. I also agree with Bonetta, who mentioned that they were a little difficult to understand at times, but that, kind of going through, you get this sense of theme, but you also get the sense of futility, and that is good. That's okay, Travis. Don't worry about that. Um, there's been worse monikers than Robbins. Russell, I appreciate your kind of call out this week's readings were a little better, but poetry still is problematic, and that's okay. I do see that you integrated your understanding of Robert Frost's Mending Wall, which poetry doesn't always have to be dense or beyond, and it can still be very rich. As Joe pointed out, also with the story of Leda and the Swan, which is a very interesting point of view when it comes to a reinterpretation of the ancient myths. Brooklyn, thank you for your reading of Catherine Ann Porter's Flowering Judas. This is a fantastic story, but as you mentioned, it still has this kind of interior monologue or interior exploration that makes it so much richer than just a surface. Chris also pointed out that Flowering Judas had that difficulty and that tension, but as he brought together in his reading of Babylon Revisited, that even though that story was very much an interior story, it also was very much an exploration of the external forces on this man's life. Great work, Travis, with your connection with modernism and the reading of the Red Wheelbarrow. The Red Wheelbarrow is one of my favorites, and I often will put it on exams and kind of explore it because I think it's something that really does have that tension between modernism and realism and Americanism, and I like that you kind of focused on that. Jeremy, I'm so glad that you found these works more enjoyable. Yes, Babylon Revisited is truly a sad story, but it has this tension that makes it enjoyable to read. I also appreciated your reading of Snows of Kilimanjaro. Um, we also, of course, had Nathan's point of view on the kind of the Red Wheelbarrow, but also in Anderson. Sherwood Anderson's Hands. There's many different short stories, and I would highly recommend taking a look at Anderson if you enjoyed that writing. Sunday Morning by Wallace Stevens. Caitlin did a great exploration of it where she pointed out kind of the points of isolation, which is definitely a theme as she kind of connected to modernism. And isolation and alienation are something that the contemporary or in modern writing and writers focus on these themes. Emmanuel, I really appreciate the exploration of Leda by H.D. as well as the William exploration. And the call out to the kind of physical wounds or physicality that you saw in the Snows of Kilimanjaro is also a fantastic observation. Travis, I really appreciate your connection with symbolism, particularly in the reading of Catherine Ann Porter's Flowering Judas. Not just religious, but sexual and all these wonderful different power imageries. That's a fantastic call out. And Jennifer, thank you so much for your involved reading of kind of I guess you'd say, the idea of modernism. Your last paragraph is fantastic. This notion of morality, this notion of justice, this loss of the social fabric and social constructions is such a great way to encapsulate modernism. And Richard, I really appreciate your exploration of the 4 poems as a whole and looking them as a kind of a concept instead of just as separate or discrete entities. Overall, I think you guys did a fantastic job with the readings, and I look forward to seeing what you do in the midterm. Remember, you can bring your book or books. You can bring any of your notes as long as they're on paper, and you can bring the study guide that's posted under week 6. If you do have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me. Thank you so much, and best of luck on the midterm.